has a lot to do with me, you know. Like, so I told you they sent out in the grapevine, Charlie, that you were coming. Conversation, Life and Times. No conversation. That nobody would be permitted, because you put that as a stipulation, to talk about last year's Pittsburgh Steelers. So sticking true to that, talk to me whether you would select Terry Bradshaw or Ben Roethlisberger as your starting quarterback.
Ben Roethlisberger in a heartbeat.
Why?
Absolutely. Durable, consistent. Right now he's in his prime. Absolutely.
Well, I know Terry Bradshaw's about 70, but I mean, yeah,
he's kind of goofy now, don't you think? Yeah.
You've been a Steelers fan for like ever.
This will be my 45th year of season tickets. 1915. You have to add a year, but our first year was 1970. My dad took me to games before that when I was a kid. He was a big football fan, and we would alternate. One year he would get Pitt season tickets, and the next year we would get Steelers season tickets. Back in those days, Pitt Stadium, as you may know, is this cavernous place, and college football, and it was rarely full. And in those years, nobody wanted to really go see the Steelers in Forbes Field, then in Pitt Stadium, ultimately at Three Rivers. Last time I was with my dad before he died was at a Steelers game. We went on a Sunday. He'd had a stroke earlier, and a great group of people that would sit around and would help him get to his seat. And so we spent that afternoon together, and he died the following Wednesday of a heart attack. So, yeah. And for me, going to Steelers games, yeah, it's about the football, but it's also a lot about going home and being comfortable in those surroundings and repeating a lot of things and kind of reliving your past. So,
was Bobby Lane part of your dad's and your world?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Bobby Lane and more quarterbacks of little repute.
Rudy Bukic?
Rudy Bukic. Rudy Bukic could stand on the 50-yard line and throw a ball and hit the goalposts on command. Left post, right post, left post. Unfortunately, he couldn't hit a receiver 5 yards down the field. But Rudy was, Rudy Bukic for sure.
See, I grew up as a Steelers guy. So excuse us for a second. We'll get to whatever he did at Chautauqua. Big Daddy Lipscomb was my kind of the hero, and I don't know particularly why, but he seemed to be dominant.
Yep, absolutely. He was big.
And Tom Tracy?
Tom the Bomb.
Yeah.
Tom the Bomb was a little guy who played fullback, and he succeeded a fellow named Fran Rogel, who was the fullback when I first started going to Steelers games. And everybody would chant in unison as the Steelers broke the huddle for their first play. They'd go, "Hey, diddle, diddle, Rogel up the middle," because that's all they ever did on the first play, first down.
They got John Henry Johnson.
John Henry Johnson, exactly. He was actually good.
They weren't. I mean, the Steelers were not, and of course, their rival at the time, and still is the Browns.
Mm-hmm.
To you, are they the Antichrist?
The Ravens are really the Antichrist. See, with the Browns, you need to actually have a rivalry in order for there to be hatred. Now, I have to say one thing. I made one mistake in going to Steelers games. I took Jerry Grice to a Steelers game. He has Browns season tickets. Mm-hmm. The Browns won 53-0. 1989, opening day. They won 53-0. I kept saying, "Let's go." He said, "No, we're not." "It's boring. Let's go." "No, we're not."
Quiet ride home.
Well, yeah, and I think your experience with going to a Steelers game, similar probably to most. I don't want to be sexist, but young men, they go to a ballpark and they reminisce about the experience with their family members, and perhaps that's why it is so, baseball especially is so compelling in that matter. Because I'm sure I can reflect on that. Even Don, if he can, think about the good old days,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if in an environment like the Steelers, where it's all season tickets. I have sat now at Heinz Field. That was named after me, by the way. I've sat at Heinz Field with the same people now for 12 years. And it's interesting. When you go into those kind of an environment, they have no idea who I am. They have no idea what I do. They know I live up here somewhere. They know I'm married. Wendy's been to one or two games. I bring my grandson once a year. That's all they know about me, except that we bond at Steelers games. And we talk and chatter and yell and boo and, you know, the whole deal. And the guy who sits in front of me, his name is the guy who sits in front of me. I have the Chulak brothers next to me, a son and his dad and his uncle. And there's Nick and there's somebody in front of him. But, you know, it's like you are bonded just about that experience for 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon.
You get that same sense? I mean, I don't have season tickets probably, but with the Pirates?
Well, I don't get to many Pirates games, so...
Is that your team? I mean, it continues to be your team?
Oh, of course.
Yeah. Where were you in 1960 when Mazeroski was done?
I was on the second floor of the Princeton University store looking at a little black and white TV going nuts. Yeah. Because that summer, my family, we would go to church, and then I would take the streetcar down to Oakland and sit in the left field bleachers with sandwiches that my mom had made and watch the Sunday doubleheaders and yell at Bob Skinner. Yeah.
Does he remember you?
No. Yeah. There were a bunch of us yelling at him, so my voice didn't stand out. Yeah. Is that, I mean, as you reflect back on your youth, sports figures do become part of that in that group? Oh boy. You know, I don't think so. Back then, I don't think we knew as much about the players as we do now. You know, they had personas on the sports pages, but I don't think we knew. I didn't, at least as a young kid. I didn't know that much about their personal lives and so forth. So not really from a personal standpoint. There were, you know, I wished I could field a baseball like Bill Mazeroski could and so forth, and that wasn't to be the case. But you know, so I had idols, favorite players for their on-field. My least favorite player in baseball, I was telling Wendy this story today, they dedicated the statue of Hannes Wagner, which was outside of Forbes Field in Oakland. And I went as a kid, there was a game that day, and they did it before the game, so I was going to the game, and the statue was here, and the Pirates lined up as though they were like on the third base line, and the Cincinnati Reds lined up like they were on the first base line, so they were in this kind of V around the statue. And the one and only time I ever asked for an autograph, I went up to the last Cincinnati Red at the end of the line, and it happened to be a pitcher named Art Fowler, and I asked him for his autograph. He said, "Beat it, kid." He was my least favorite player ever.
Yeah. They got rid of him shortly thereafter. Bob Prince?
The gunner, the best. Bob Prince, the gunner, the broadcaster, and Jim Woods, the possum, his sidekick. Yeah. I still, of course, we, in a strange, weird thing, we cannot get the Pirates games on MLB, actually streams baseball games, but we're in a blackout area. And I have researched this and fought this and written to people and called to no avail. We are in a I keep saying, we don't have the Pirates on. We don't have the Pirates on. And their argument back is that Time Warner could carry the Pirates because they have the right to carry the Pirates. So since they have the right to carry the Pirates, it's a blackout area and I can't watch it, even though they don't carry the Pirates. I mean, that sounds like just a complete circular thing. So but frankly, I sit on the back porch on a summer evening and you can get the games, the radio broadcasts. And in a way, I like that better.
When you sit on the back porch of your house, you do sit in a special seat, don't you?
I do. We have Forbes Field seats. Seats originally from Forbes Field. When they were demolishing the stadium, Wendy went down and there was piles of them. And she bought 4 seats, and they are original seats from 1909. I've researched it that far. And they are on our back porch, and she paid, I think, $20 for all 4 of them, or maybe $10 for all 4 of them. And they're sitting on our back porch now. I've had to paint them a couple of times, but they still look really pretty darn good. Then when they tore Three Rivers down, they were selling seats, and they were $200 for two of them.
Yeah. You don't have any of those?
I have two of those.
Oh, two of them, okay.
There's two for $200.
Good. Whitney sits next to you? Like the good old days down there?
Actually, she doesn't. No.
You go to Heinz Field, and just because you've already told us that it's named after you, but are there any other Heinzes they're named after?
Who's named
Heinz
after?
Field? Yeah, Heinz Field you mentioned, and you disclosed it, even though that was my first question. Because it's named after you.
Of course.
Yeah. But are there anybody else? Was anybody else considered in the Heinz family to be named after?
No.
No.
I don't think so. There's a company by the same name. I think they paid actually to have it. Yeah. Yeah. It's now owned by a Brazilian hedge fund. And just kind of wringing the value out of the company so they can sell it.
So there's not as many as 57 varieties anymore?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I have no financial interest in knowing at all.
Interestingly, I don't know where somebody brought that up. Just anybody know this, but the 57 varieties, you hear about that. Somebody asked, where did you get that? Was there 57 varieties? And apparently, some marketing person just came up with a number and put that in. Did anybody know that at all? Anybody? That's all I heard, and we'll go with that one.
That is correct.
Okay.
Really?
There were
Somebody?
more than 57 at the time.
John Jackson.
That was John Jackson, a voice from God back then. And he still holds services on Sunday, so we can go to see the voice of God. How'd you get to Chautauqua?
Well, it was kind of a long and winding road. As a kid, we were hardly ever here. I have a whole bunch of relatives that have houses on the grounds, but my family was actually practically never here. We would come occasionally weekends to visit and stay with an aunt, one or the other. And I kind of remember that we rented, when I was like 11 years old, we rented a house for a month. And that was back in the days when the deal was that the woman, wife, would take the kids to the vacation spot, and the husband would come on the weekends, and the husband would go play golf, and so forth. And we did that once, and my mother did not like it. And she actually did not like Chautauqua very much. It may have been because it was full of my dad's family, but she really didn't care for Chautauqua that much. So I was practically never here. I was never here in my teenage years. But my first entrepreneurial venture at my dad's earnings, urging, was in that month that I was here, he fashioned a cart to be pulled behind my bike, and I would go to the Dairy Lee Dairy Store, which was in the Colonnade. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but the Dairy Lee Dairy Store was there, and I would get the bottles of milk. Remember bottles? Milk used to come in bottles. Put them in the cart and deliver them. And I would get paid for delivering the milk bottles, and I had a route, and I'd be there as soon as the Dairy Lee store. This was, my dad felt that, you need to be doing something worthwhile. So, and there was a Mrs. Cummins who always tipped me $5 every time I would come. And I thought for the longest time that it was someone from the Cummins family of Cummins Engine, but apparently not. My understanding is that the Cummins folks had really no particular connection to Chautauqua County before the plant was lured here, but Mrs. Cummins would give me $5. So that was the first business I was in on the grounds, was delivering milk. But that was it. And then from then, for the longest time, I wasn't here at all. Wendy and I came from Philadelphia once. That was a memorable trip because one of the engines quit on the Allegheny. Well, that was a Mohawk Airlines flight between Bradford and Philadelphia. But we really were here very little. After college, one of the reasons is that I had gone to work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development in Philadelphia. It was my first real job. Summer work all through high school and college. I sold knives door to door. I was a messenger boy in an ad agency and was there instead of Chautauqua. But Department of Housing and Urban Development in Philadelphia, and I was assigned to the New Jersey section, and I was an urban renewal representative. And this would have been in 1966. And boy, oh boy, for a green kid I had my master's degree from Syracuse in public administration, I realized I didn't know what public administration was really like until I started working in North Jersey. It was a very tumultuous time. And at that time, urban renewal was find a slum, clear it, relocate the people to decent, safe, and sanitary housing, parentheses, whether they liked it or not, and put up something else. And the cities would propose projects, and there would be this endless review by the federal government, of which I was a part. I quickly found that the biggest obstacles to progress was not the facts on the ground or anything else, it was the federal bureaucracy. And so my job really became trying to move these projects through the glacial pace of the federal, my fellow workers. Because if you're a federal employee, you can never get in trouble by saying no. You can definitely get in trouble by saying yes. And you can always find something in the book to say no. So it was a very frustrating life, but from that standpoint. But I became area coordinator for all of North Jersey as the years went by, probably in 1969 or so. But before that, one of our projects was the thing that sparked the Newark riots in '68. The New Jersey College of Medicine and Dentistry wanted to build a new campus, and there was going to be a slum clearance, quote-unquote, project to make room for that campus. And Newark was really interesting to me. It was the clash of the Italian ruling class, and very mafia riddled, honestly, and new black power guys. Go to meetings, and again, at that point I'm only a couple of years out of college, and there's guys lining the walls dressed with their afros and dashikis and carrying spears. You know, it's just, you know, it was an interesting time to be involved in that. The director of the Newark Housing Authority, just one little example, his driver, quote unquote, sat in on all the meetings. The driver's name was Sal Dispensieri, and Sal would sit back in the corner and take notes. Sal was, yeah, he was the driver, and he was also the guy that was carrying the message back to the guys that were actually running the Newark Housing Authority. We had a project, and I'll stop with all of this about New Jersey, but it was where I kind of learned the ropes of what the real world's like. We had a project that's right, it was called the Industrial River Project, and it was right, it's probably about where the new Meadowlands Stadium is, just to the right, across from Newark Airport, and it was all swamps. And back then, this pristine wetland wasn't terribly pristine, but it would be called such today, I'm sure. All we did was fill it. We just dumped dirt in there, and so you could create a solid platform. So in this case, there was going to be little light industrial and jobs and blah, blah, blah. The trucking company that was bringing the dirt in was run by a guy named Gerardo Catena, and Gerardo was reputedly one of the big mafia bosses. And we discovered that the costs were going up and up and up and up and up. And how come? And you know, they keep trucking more dirt in and trucking more dirt in. Well, they were using what was called the truck count method. A 10-ton truck could carry 10 tons, right? So the truck would roll in, the guy would check it off, one 10-ton truck, 10 tons of dirt delivered, except the trucks were only about 1/3 full. And finally somebody figured, actually the guy that blew the whistle on it was I don't know, he was my mole inside the housing authority telling me what was going on. A fellow named Ken Gibson, a black guy who ultimately was elected the first black mayor of Newark. So Ken blew the whistle on this, and the FBI was going to go in and raid this shack where all the records were kept. And I thought, good, you know, now this is going to bust the whole thing wide open. They're going to scoop these records up. But funny thing, the little shack burned down the night before the raid was coming. So somebody told somebody, probably somebody in the Newark cops, told Jerry Catena what was going on. But that was the fun world of federal service and cleaning up the environment and all of the good things that I signed on for.
Refresh my recollection. What sparked the riots?
Well, it was the project was the excuse for a tinderbox to have a match tossed on it. I don't remember whether it was, you know, somebody being pulled over by the cops or something, but in those days, in the late 60s, it didn't take much of anything, because there were people that wanted to get it going,
Right.
Unquestionably. So we moved from...
By the way, how did you meet her?
Who?
Your wife.
This one, she invited me to a prom in my my junior year.
High school.
And that was 54 years ago, I guess, or 55 years ago, or 56 years ago, probably.
It's a dangerous thing to do right now.
No,
You know.
no, because we're proud that our 50th anniversary is this summer. So.
Okay, good. Did she pick up a book and find your picture and say that was it?
No, her mother told her to invite me.
Ah.
It was an arranged marriage, basically. Yeah.
They see you at church? You at church?
Yeah.
It was a church connection.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that nice boy. Yeah.
A nice boy.
Nice clean.
Why did her mother think that?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think that she did. I always liked her mother.
Yeah.
I loved her dad and I loved her mother.
Yeah. And so she invited you to the prom, and
That was it.
that was it.
That was it. Nobody else would ever go out with me. So.
A week later, you became married, and that was it.
Yeah, exactly. Lived happily ever after.
Yeah.
We've had 37 wonderful years out of the 50.
This is Charles Heinz.
She's heard that line before. She knows it's not true. It's been 38.
So your Department of Housing and Urban Development, next thing
Yeah,
you know?
the New Jersey was transferred to the New York office, so I was displaced, and there was an opening in Pittsburgh, so we went back home to Pittsburgh, and I became area coordinator for Western Pennsylvania. And at that point, they were doing some nice rearranging of functions and stuff, so there was more to do. So I did that for quite a while, but frankly got to the point where I just had to get out of the federal bureaucracy. It was driving me nuts. So I left HUD in, I think it was 1975, and became a sort of an itinerant consultant in the field, and I had clients up in the northern tier of Pennsylvania, Erie County, Pennsylvania, McKean County, Pennsylvania, Potter County, Pennsylvania, Oil City, City of Butler. And I would travel each week and visit them. So I was on the road a lot. And I thought, geez, you know, Wendy and I talked, and let's try Chautauqua again. What the heck, I'm working closer to, you know, to those places where I'm working than being in Pittsburgh. So we rented for 2 weeks, and then we rented for a month. And then in 1976, I think it was, we bought a house at 7 Cookman. It was a 4-story rooming house, which we made into our single-family home. Sandy, 2 young kids at that point, and so then I would travel, but stay in the house in the winter. This was actually a winterized house, and there were very few winterized houses on the grounds back in those days. Not a lot of them, and very few people in the wintertime. So ultimately, in 1978, we moved here in the summer of '78, and it was for a lot of reasons. It was, you know, we had both grown up in Pittsburgh. We had family in Pittsburgh. There was, you know, expectations and some, you know, how it is when family is kind of on top of you. So we moved up here, and Sandy came into 5th grade in this school, and Ted came into 1st grade in this school, Turner Elementary. And we started our life here in Chautauqua. And I continued to travel, but traveled from here to the same folks. We came in June, and when the season was over, the people across the street from us started boarding up their house. And Wendy's kind of tugging, what are they doing? What are they doing? So God bless her. It was not hard. It was hard for Wendy to make this change. The kids, Sandy made the change very easily. Ted not so easily. So it was rough. But we've been here since '78, and at this point, it's home. I mean, it is absolutely home. We love living in Chautauqua County, and so I fell in with. Sometimes you fall in with evil companions. This one over here, Mr. Grice, I fell in with Mr. Grice, who was working also in the field. And one day, Jerry said to me, let's have lunch. And we had lunch. He won't remember this because he's older now. But
Dotage, yeah.
Yeah. We had lunch at the Log Cabin Restaurant in either, that's Waterford or Wattsburg. Okay? Waterford. And Jerry said, let's build a house in Chautauqua. And I said, okay. I was getting tired of the whole HUD scene and doing the same thing over and over again. And I thought, geez, maybe this is a way to do something different and get into something. So we built a house at 9 Wiley and sold it, and built a house then at 41 Wiley, and that started what became Chautauqua Enterprises, was the name of our company. Mr. Peterson was an early attorney for us. And we were off and running, and the first big thing we did was the North Shore condominiums. And you got to understand, I don't know, how many of you lived or were in Chautauqua in the late 70s? Some. Bob Hess became president of Chautauqua about that time, and Bob had a little community meeting, and apparently, this may be a legendary story, it may even be true. A woman stood up and said, "You don't understand, Dr. Hess. Chautauqua is a place of shabby gentility. It always will be shabby and genteel." Well, Bob, the administration at Chautauqua, frankly, was a little shabby at that point as well. It was part-time. Colonnade wasn't full all year round. And Bob Hess, Chautauqua needed a person to pick Chautauqua up by the neck and shake it. And Bob did that. And he didn't last long at Chautauqua. I think because of that, he made a lot of enemies. But the story that Bob always told about what Chautauqua was like is he was wandering around into the buildings and introducing himself to folks. And he went into the library. Torrey Isaac was the librarian at the time, and Bob was trying to make conversation, and Torrey said, "Oh, and we're having the place painted." And Bob said, "Oh, that's great." And wanted to be collegial, and so, "What color is it going to be?" And Torrey said, "I don't know, whatever the painters have in the shop." That was the way the place was run at the time. So Bob started the changing of Chautauqua, and Dan Bratton then came on early in the 80s, and Wendy and I had started with the kids on spring break going to Hilton Head Island for the spring break, and I was watching this project being built close to where we were, which was a timeshare project called Swallowtail, and I thought, wow, that's really interesting. You buy the time for your vacation. I wonder if that could work at Chautauqua, where you'd buy the first week of the season or the third week of the season, and you came forever for a price that for us when we started over there was $13,000 for the week. And talked to Dan Bratton about it, and Dan was always a researcher, and he starts scribbling, and Dan was always very encouraging, and just a wonderful guy, a prince of a guy. But we got approval from the Board of Trustees to move ahead with this project. It was land that was owned by Chautauqua, and they put it up for sale. And we were vilified. We were really, the place was called around the town, it was going to be a cheap motel. It was, those people up there, they're going to sit at the pool and drink, and they're never going to be real Chautauquans. It's a phrase that just makes me shiver. You know, some of the real Chautauquans that have come out of that are, you know, Mary Ann Moorfield, who head of the Writers Center, and Steve Percy, the chair of the foundation, and a lot of the people were introduced through, hey, let's try Chautauqua, let's buy a week and see if we like it, and then let's build a house, and then let's get involved, and let's. Karen Goodell and Wendy and I were having lunch last Thursday, and Karen and Jane and Jerry and Bill Sofel, we were the ones that you know, got this thing rolling. And Karen was saying something about, you know, sometimes I feel like when I'm a real estate person, and you know, a real estate lady is not really looked on as somebody who changes the world and so forth. And then we started talking about how really in many ways we did change the world with that project. Younger families moved in. There was and Tony Joy was doing the same thing. I don't know how some of you, I'm sure, know Tony. And Tony and Jim Mayshark were building condos in the middle of the grounds, and we were building up at the north end. And that lasted till the late 1980s. We had pretty much built everything we could build on the grounds at that point in terms of vacant land, and we were doing lots of rehab projects. We did the Maranatha, we did a project down at 12 South Lake. So we were doing you know, rehab and taking rooming houses and turning them into condominiums and so forth. And it was a time when money was really loose. I mean, it was scary. I had a banker named Marvin Bird up at Marine Midland Bank. Greg will remember Marv Bird. And we had a line of credit with Marine Midland. And Marv was he was working on Joe Robbie Stadium for the Miami Dolphins. Marv was in Miami. And I would call Marv up and say, Marv, we need $40,000. And he'd say, fine, I'll tell the branch down in Jamestown, you can go, they'll put it in your checking account tomorrow. I mean, it was scary. And it did ultimately, with the savings and loan crisis crash in 1989. In about 87, they called me up to Marine Midland Bank, and I should have figured something out here. They were going to honor me as the longest commercial real estate customer who then was in existence at Marine Midland Bank. It had been 6 years or whatever it had been. And I'm thinking, you know, they gave me a nice pen and pencil. And so forth. And the next year, when the savings and loan crisis, it was, beat it, Buster, we don't do real estate anymore. We're done. So we had no credit. We were halfway through a project down the road. We had a real estate agency, Vacation Properties. We were doing property management, but frankly, my love was the building and the planning of projects. So we broke the company up. Paid off all our debts. Jerry had his own construction company the whole time, but he took the construction side of it. Bill Sofel took the real estate side of it, and I stayed with Bill for a while until one day Tom Becker said to me at a party, "How you doing? You like your job?" And of course, you know, "Oh yeah, sure, yeah." He said, "Well, Tom Smith's retiring. Would you be interested in his job?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, Tom Becker called me then on Monday. That was on a Sunday. He called me Monday and said, "Have lunch with Dan at Grace's Sweet Shop on Wednesday. So I met Dan Bratton for lunch on Wednesday, and he said, would you like Tom Smith's job? You don't have to take the hotel. We'll get somebody else to do that, and here's the salary. I said, yep.
And you did get the hotel.
That was 1993.
Yeah. So much for due diligence.
Exactly. Exactly.
Was that hard transition?
It was actually, it was an easy transition because I knew everybody in the Colonnade anyway, and a lot of them, Joe Johnson, Dick Reddington, go on and on. Doug, we're good friends anyway, so I had known them. So from a personal standpoint, it was an easy transition. I never realized how hard it is working in that Colonnade. It is really hard work, and that was an eye-opener to me, quite frankly. Until you've actually done that, you just don't know. I mean, the image is that in the wintertime everybody sits around drinking coffee and doesn't do anything, and then they scramble like real hard in the summertime. But it is really hard work. There are so many moving pieces, and so many things that have to be right, and so many things that, and fortunately, it has always been a veteran staff in the Colonnade. I always said to people who didn't like working at Chautauqua were people who had never worked someplace else, because the culture was, certainly under Dan, it was, hey, if your kid's sick, don't worry about signing out and taking an hour and a half sick leave. Go home and take care of your kid, in the wintertime. And people understood that you could do that, and they understood in the summertime you were going to work an hour and a half extra because there was a job that you had to get done. So I never quite realized how hard it was. But the transition was easy. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it.
Initially, what was your job?
I do laugh because it was ridiculous. I was in charge of, there are a lot of things I knew nothing about. I was in charge of the bookstore. I took Tom Smith's job. I was in charge of the bookstore. I was in charge of the golf course. I was in charge of the police force. I was in charge of architectural review. I was in charge of buildings and ground maintenance. And I wasn't the manager of the hotel. I was allowed to hire Tom Faireye as manager of the hotel. But I was in charge of the hotel. And there must have been something else. I knew nothing about how to run a bookstore. I knew nothing about how to run a golf course. I knew kind of stuff about the hotel because, we had been doing property management. I knew that you check in on a Saturday and, stuff like that, basics. You clean rooms. I cleaned a lot of rooms at vacation properties, so never learned how to fold a fitted bottom sheet, though. But, yeah. So my goal then, which I succeeded greatly at, was to gently shed like one of those responsibilities a year, until when I retired I was just doing architectural review and new construction, basically. My goal was also to get to the point where I had no employees reporting to me, and finally I got to that point as well.
Your experience at North Shore, the vilification that you went through, the images that that were perceived. How did you translate that into a role where you're now the head of the architectural review? You have to really control projects, recommend to the board restrictions, and you have at least a perception, or I think it's true, an architectural review board that's very, very precise. And it isn't loose by any stretch of the imagination. How did that all happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have to think a little bit about that, because I think that probably from my experience of being a builder on the grounds, I knew everybody. I knew all the contractors and that were working in that arena. I certainly brought a friendlier approach to the process. There was a woman who shall be nameless at the moment, that spent one whole summer, she says, just in tears because of what the Architectural Review Board had done to her over a Bilco door going in her behind her house. The chairman of the Architectural Review Board was not a property owner. He was a lawyer from Rochester who fancied himself an expert in historic preservation and didn't have any connection to the Chautauqua community. So I think, you know, the good news was that I knew everybody and knew the process and wanted to be helpful to property owners to get things done in a correct way. I think that's probably also the bad news, in that I probably knew too many people too well and was anxious to help them out and so forth. I mean, all these things, these pendulums swing back and forth in the regulatory world, and there's certainly, I'm not going to tell you which ones, there's certainly some mistakes I made out there. There's a lot of stuff, though, that I'm real proud of that happened through the architectural review process. I frankly, I like the process of building Chautauqua buildings and so forth more than I like doing architectural review, but architectural review is fun. And so the pendulum has swung a little bit now with John Shedd, and John Shedd is outstanding as far as I'm concerned. John and I are friends, and we have lunch every so often and talk, and I call John Charlie 2.0 the upgrade. I mean, he really, he is a good guy, and but as I say, this pendulum does swing back and forth.
What are you most proud of?
Well, I think, again, Karen and Wendy and I were having this conversation, and I think that for all of us, Karen, Wendy, myself, Jerry, Jane, Bill Sopel, and by extension, Tony Joy, what we kind of made flesh out of a vision that Bob Hess and then Dan Bratton had of that Chautauqua had to get out of its stick-in-the-mudness, if you will. And new people had to come to Chautauqua, and new blood had to come to Chautauqua. I think we facilitated that. In Chautauqua projects, the same corollary to that, the first big project I did, and one of the ones that I am most proud of, was the main gate renovation. And one of the most important things about that project, and it was Dan Bratton's vision, he called this the access agenda. There is still a big town-gown divide in this area. The people who shop at Tops Markets in Mayville now versus what their experience when they shop in the summer. And this is silly stuff. And everybody realizes that we all exist on the tourism business in this area, and it's very important and so forth. But there's still a lot of crabbing. There was a lot of crabbing back then. And Dan was determined to break down those barriers. And he had all of us out doing things in the community. My exposure to all of that was, of course, through the fire department. And I met a lot of people I would not meet otherwise, and could bond with people that I never would have bonded with otherwise. But the main gate was a physical symbol of that. And for those of you who do not remember, once upon a time, the fence was on the road side of the main gate. The gate was inside. So when people came on a Saturday to check in, they were scattered all over Route 394. It was really dangerous because they couldn't come in until they had bought their tickets. And the building was wide open. It was an old trolley station, so that octagon where the tickets are sold now was open air. And all the tickets were paper. So if you wanted to stay for 10 days, you got a 1-week piece of paper and 3 one-day pieces of paper. And they were all in little cubicles, like a railroad station in the 1940s movies. And the kids would fish out these paper tickets, and the opera tickets were all done in paper. And in the wintertime, we would sort the paper on the floor of Carnahan. Well, it was the Carnahan store. It's now Pat's store, Pat Finson's store. So by simply thinking, and it's one of those, I pretended to be an architect and a builder and an engineer for years and fooled people for a long time. But one of the things that I was good at, I have to say, was saying when there was a problem, gee, maybe if we turned the wall 90 degrees, maybe that would help, or something like that. So I'm sitting at the main gate one day, and I thought, oh, suppose the fence was back here. What would that do? Well, my gosh. So we did that. And that, I think, really became a physical symbol of trying to attract more people. And the other thing we did at the same time was computerize the ticket system, which was a struggle, which was a real struggle to get that done. But we had a wonderful programmer from Warren, a woman named Lana Creel, who helped do it. My experience with computers then was you buy the computer, it's in a box, you read the directions, and you do the program. And she kept saying to me, what do you want your program to do? And I said, well, you know, just you do it. No, you tell me what you want. I'll do what you want. What do you want? And she did. So we have a ticket system that, you can say I'm coming at 9:15 and I'm leaving at 3:15, 7.5 days later, and the ticket will come out. I still think it's a miracle when I walk up there, because the sound of that ticket printer going is, oh my God, it worked again. Because at the beginning it didn't. It didn't. It was a rough go the first couple of weeks with that system. So we upgraded the ticket system and we changed the main gate. The other big thing that I was happiest about was this project, buying this land from the school. Again, there was a tremendous amount of distrust, and the voters had to vote to sell the building to us. And they thought for sure that we were going to make a lot of money by building housing all through the back here, and they're going to tear down Turner, and they're going to do this, and they're going to do that, and it's all about money, and it's all the rich folks in Chautauqua, and yada yada yada, the stuff that you hear. And Dan Bratton and I did lots of public meetings, and Jack Volker was really very much involved in that, saying that's not what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. So when you think about Marty Coyle, some of you know, Marty Coyle was a trustee at the time, and Marty was pushing this through the Board of Trustees. When you think about what that purchase did, in many ways, it helped facilitate the building of the new school. It changed the dynamic along this whole part of the ground. So we have the community center, we have the fitness center. There are a lot of naysayers that the fitness center was never going to make it, and we'd be filling in the pool, and that's expensive to run, and why are you keeping the pool, and blah, 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 blah. We had a moment like I was just describing about the main gate when we were actually, Dan Bratton and Tom Becker and I were in Billy Goodell's kitchen in Bronxville, New York, and we've got the map spread out in front of us, and Billy said, suppose the tennis courts moved up there, and, that was a battle. People did not know, God, you can't move. We love those courts. We love those courts. Those courts are wonderful. They're the best courts ever. We have our morning draw down there, our evening draw, or whatever the heck it was. We can't change. We can't change, and we've got now those fabulous tennis courts that are up at that end, and the garden, and the garden district, and the sale of that real estate paid for the renovations here, and one thing and another. So I would say those two things, Greg, are the ones that...
Well, it has dramatically changed, and for those that have been around a long time, you have been at the epicenter of those changes. I know you play that down, but it's absolutely true. Are there things you'd want to do all over again?
Yeah, I would have stayed in North Jersey. Oh, I don't know. Of course, there are a lot of things. I could spend 10 times this amount of time telling you all the mistakes I've made, things that I would do differently. There's no No, I'm just teasing him. He's one of my best friends. But, no, there's no point in going through.
No.
You know, it is what it is.
Because you really have seen, been part of the significant growth and also change in the character of not only the real estate, but also the folks who occupy the real estate. What's your sense of all that?
Well, I think that was absolutely necessary. I think Chautauqua was really quite hidebound, and in the wintertime, my gosh, Wendy and I were at the first one of attempts at these, and Bob Hess decided that on a Friday night we should have movies, and the movies would be in what was the Carnahan store and now is Pat's Loft. We will have movies on Friday nights, and all the people that are on the grounds can come. So we set up, there was a screen, there was a projector, there were cans of film, and the first movie started to roll, and Bob was running the projector, and he'd forgotten to put on the take-up spool.
Yeah.
So the film is going all over the floor of the, that was the first.
We've all done that, by the way.
That was the first and last community gathering in the wintertime in those days. And there were probably only 10 of us there, maybe 20. Because again, early days, not much was winterized. But so I think that all that had to change, and it's produced this really a vibrant winter community. One of the last things I was talking about, and still I guess can be on the table, is that I get yelled at a lot about this, but that horrible, ugly south parking lot, which is an environmental disaster and an ugly welcome to Chautauqua. One traffic consultant said, "Oh, this is a nice strip mall you've got here. The parking's in front and the good stuff's in the back," and that's the welcome. But think of an assisted living senior housing development there as our population in Western New York ages. Lots of things that could happen going forward because transition isn't over yet. It is definitely grander now here. I think the clientele is grander than it was. I argue with Tom Becker about this a lot. I keep reminding Tom that this is a Midwestern place. Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Buffalo are Midwestern cities. They're not Eastern cities. They're Midwestern cities. There's a Midwestern culture. You walk from your car into Tops Markets, and the person coming out will nod and smile at you, and you will nod and smile at them. And the same thing happens on 3rd Street in Jamestown. So I think that we have a lot. It's an Ivy League university in the summer, basically, and that's different, and the clientele is different, and I'm sure there are economic reasons for that. That it's important. The program is very expensive. Ticket prices have to raise money for that. Annual fund, all the rest of it. It's more than it has been. It's another metamorphosis of Chautauqua in a way. I hope we don't lose our Midwesternness in the process. And Tom's a Midwesterner. I don't think we will, but it is it's kind of a slide from where we were in 1978 to the present, and probably still moving.
Given the dynamics of Chautauqua, and this may be just a loaded question, you can just say, with impunity, I don't want to talk about it. But given the dynamics, you always have the question of affordability, affordable housing. You've been in the housing business through the Department of Housing and Urban Development and created a lot of housing availability here. But it's affordable housing availability. And did you ever see that day where we're going to have a developer who will be able to provide housing at, I don't want to say, not market rates?
No.
Yeah.
No. I just don't think so. The economics of it are pretty simple. I mean, you've got 9 weeks to make money if you're trying to do a commercial rental type project, you got 9 weeks to make your money. And you know what the rents are like in the winter versus what they're like in the summer. And you're paying property taxes based on value of the structure. And you can go up and argue economics all you want and cash flow and the rest to try and get your assessment changed, but that's a hard thing. It's so skewed, summer versus the other 40-some weeks, that I think it's a really tough thing. People, and I don't fault those folks charging whatever they need to do to keep going, because God bless them. A lot of those places do keep going, the older homes and the rentals that are not in new condos and so forth. But the whole vacation thing has changed. When hey, we're going to Florida, we're going to rent a condo. You know, it's not we're going to go to a rooming house. It's not we're going to go to rent an apartment for a week in a 1930s structure. Our tastes have all changed. And I think that just the rental economics here in Chautauqua have make it almost impossible to do affordable housing unless through donations, which happens, of course, Presbyterian House is a great example, where you can write off the capital costs by having philanthropy pay for those capital costs. Mm-hmm. But that means you're into a nonprofit situation where people are looking for tax deductions in addition to being philanthropic. And so for the typical rooming house, that's not an option.
So the option to get folks on the ground to pay a market rate is really subsidizing the tenants? Or that's a question rather than a...
Well, I think it's probably subsidizing the capital cost.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I just don't. We've had affordable housing task force and a lot of bright minds working on this over the years, and people squawk about where the ministers and school teachers, and we still have ministers and school teachers, but they're renting condos. Mm-hmm. So I just don't. It is what it is. It is what it is now, and I don't see it going backwards.
Amphitheater, where's that status at?
I believe, I had lunch with John a week or so ago, and I'm not even sure about this. Maureen would probably be able to say. I believe that we're going to be moving ahead with construction drawings. We've finished schematic design. We're construction drawings in the next phase. I think we may be starting into the process of talking to contractors, maybe even bidding. Because the last thing we want is to raise whatever the target is today, I don't know what the exact target is, to raise that, then go to bids, having had no contact with the people who are actually going to build the thing, and find, oh my gosh, it's $5 million more than everybody thought. So I think there is still be an ongoing move of design and preparation, so that when we can pull the trigger, we can pull the trigger with some confidence and more knowledge than we have today. The hardest thing about that project, now that the design has been basically figured out, is figuring out how to build it. Just physically, sequentially, how are we going to build it? And there's about 5 different ways that we're all arguing about. Because Tom Becker has been kind enough to allow me to stay on as a volunteer on the amphitheater design team. That's what I love.
So we can afford you.
You can afford me. That's right. Yeah, exactly. And it's a great, very talented group of people, and so it's been great fun for me to do that. So I think that's where we are, and then raise the money.
Well, I know there's maybe 5 options, but just give me a teaser of the season ends, final gavel, 3 taps the gavel. What the hell happens in that? Excuse me. What the heck happens, camera, during that time period?
Everybody walks out with a bench. Do we get
and you're going to sell them and they put them on the back porch?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, I think. Well, I hope that we're able to modify them. The new benches will still be wooden benches, but they'll have a different rake and rise of the seat back and what have you, and they'll be a little higher. But I think we can use a lot of the parts of the old ones to do that. Yeah, here's the way to think about it. think of it as two projects. The front half from the Massey, Oregon towards Route 394 is really a big open barn. There's not a whole lot of fancy carpentry, delicate wiring, one thing and another of that nature. The sound system will be put into it, the speakers and all of that. So that's a big open. Can you build that in 9 months? Yeah, you can do that. You know, it's not. There's a lot of things you have to think about. Keeping it dry. Do you take the roof off in sections? Do you take it all off and put it back? How do you, there's a lot of means and methods, they call it in the construction business, of just how to go about doing it. But yeah, that's not all that daunting a task, because it's a big open barn. There's not a whole lot of pieces to it. A roof, a bunch of sticks, a floor, and you put some benches back. So conceptually, not that hard. The back of it, well, we have built buildings off-season that are that big. That's just building another commercial building. And the hard thing and the tricky thing is to make sure that they meet where they're supposed to. And that the organ is completely shrink-wrapped and carefully stored and doesn't move and is underpinned because we're going to be digging down and what have you. So there's a lot of things to think about, but with two crews, one crew working on the front, one crew working on the back, working 6 days a week, and getting at it the day after the season, and being finished by like May 10th or something like that, or the first week in May, so that Marty can move stuff around and get ready. That can be done. I think almost everybody thinks that can be done.
As long as it doesn't snow.
Well, and what we've got to do is get that roof back on. Not take it off. We can't take it off. We can't take it all off and have it rain, because then we'll have a mud pit. So we've got to get the roof fixed, because the roof does change. The roof lines do change somewhat. So we got to get that done in some kind of a sequential way, so that everything's pretty much still covered as we're working, and get that roof on, and then get the whole building tented to do the rest of it and heated.
Charlie Heinz, unbelievable.